Welcome to the Good Faith Podcast, where friends who follow Jesus help each other make sense of the world. I'm your host, Curtis Chang. This podcast is produced by a nonpartisan 501c3 organization. I am recording this intro on the week of April 13th, 2026. In the past few days, our president has acted in more and more disturbing ways, as if this were possible. From his erratic actions on Iran to posting an image of himself literally as Jesus and more, his dangerous and blasphemous actions, well, they leave me practically speechless. At an emotional level, this moment reminds me of a situation many of our Good Faith listeners have described for themselves. It is, say, Thanksgiving, and the extended family has gathered around the dinner table. Then, in the middle of dinner, your crazy uncle, who is rarely seen by anyone, starts launching into an incomprehensible and offensive diatribe. Everyone is speechless, and there's no one who can stop him midway. Finally, someone gently changes the subject to something more fruitful for everyone. That is how I feel right now. We feel speechless at the craziness, and none of us listening can stop it. We at Good Faith will, of course, in the future, bring up and discuss the topic of the president and seek to do so in a thoughtful and biblically informed way. However, for this episode, I am going to be that relative that gently changes the subject. In this episode, 9-time Grammy nominee and Dove Award winner Matt Maher joins D.T. Slothman, Good Faith's own director of content, for a conversation recorded at the Illuminate Arts Faith Conference. Matt is known for blending modern pop and rock with the richness of traditional hymnody. Matt was also one of the artists who contributed to The Kingdom of Jesus, our after-party album with the Porter's Gate. A quick note before we begin. Due to a minor technical issue during the live recording, we're joining this conversation already in progress as Matt reflects on the importance of musical traditions for his own and our spiritual formation. While we are seeking to momentarily change the subject, there are several threads that Matt talks about that fruitfully connect to this present moment. Here's DT's conversation with Matt.
I grew up in a culture where group singing was part of the fabric of our identity.
Okay.
What we did as people in Newfoundland. So you sing on a weekend around the kitchen table, you're singing folk songs, someone's playing a squeeze box, someone's playing the spoons, someone's playing a guitar. And then into high school, I learned classic rock, I learned 80s and 90s pop and rock. And then when we went to church, we would also sing there. So I learned very quickly that I loved music and music was what I wanted to do. I originally wanted to do film scoring.
Okay.
The thing I love about movie music is that it serves an underlying story and it serves something larger than itself. So I love music, art for art's sake, but the thing I love about film scores is that they serve the movement of what's happening emotionally and on a visual standpoint on screen. And I realized that I was so drawn to that I picked up unconsciously that that's a big part of what worship music does. Is it's a soundtrack to a heavenly liturgy that's happening. There's this divine historical drama that stretches from Genesis to Revelation, and every week we come together and try to remember the whole story and contextualize it in whatever season of life we're in. And music can serve this secondary function where it helps underscore that for people. And then it becomes part of the soundtrack of their lives. In 95, 30 years ago, I moved to Phoenix, had a conversion experience. It happened through the charismatic renewal in the Catholic Church.
So,
which is wild.
so the 3 C's now.
Yeah,
Canadian,
yeah,
Catholic,
the
charismatic. Okay.
Yeah,
Just if you're keeping score at home.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think I was sort of drawn to this freedom of expression, but then also drawn to the familiarity of the framework or the lattice work of, we're going to pray these things every week. We're going to say these things every week. We're going to stand up and sit down and kneel usually at the same places. So it felt like there were boundaries, but it felt like at the same time, on an interior level, I was being encouraged and discipled to explore the depths of those boundaries. Like, feel free to play in this yard, but it's fenced in, but you can go all the way to the edge. You don't have to just try to stay in the middle. And so I think what that did for me was it sort of provided this maximum environment in which I got to use my gifts and talents in a community that said they gave me the opportunity. And so I just started writing songs, and I was influenced heavily by that, and wrote a lot of bad songs that we wouldn't sing on Sundays, and then occasionally would write one and they go, yeah, this one works.
Okay. Do you ever go back to the bad songs and go, can I do something with that? Maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was? Or do they pretty much, once you've written the song off, is it dead to you?
It's not dead. There's another Catholic songwriter artist named John Michael Talbot who was really popular in the 70s and 80s. Still around, still doing incredible ministry. But I heard him once say that he thought a song was never really done. And which I think is really true. To me, what I've come to understand is that the song isn't saying what I want it to say, and I'm the reason. I'm getting in the way of it. It's not so much the song's getting in the way of me. And you're right in the sense that if something is a great idea, I'm more and more find my songs, when they sort of carry a lightning bolt of revelation in them, those are the ones that tend to.
What do you mean by that? A lightning bolt of revelation?
It means like
is that when you're writing the song, it strikes you?
Yeah, when you're writing it, it's ministering to you. You're almost enfleshing theology in a way, right? Because like theology is like an idea, but then when you put music to it, like you're almost, it's like theology exists in a different dimension, and then all of a sudden it's like 2-dimensional, and then it becomes 3-dimensional in a piece of art, because you can actually experience it in the physical world. And so for me, when I'm writing a song, I wrote a song yesterday with Francis Chan.
Really?
Yeah, and his daughter and another friend, and we, for the verses, used the Nicene Creed.
Okay.
And I love this because his daughter Mercy she's very kind of quiet. She's just sort of sitting there. And then Mitch Wong was the other composer, and we were singing this line of the chorus, and it was, as it is in heaven, let it be on earth, one God, one people, as it is in heaven, let it be in your church.
Oh, I like that.
And when she said, let it be in your church, it just sort of like you felt the weight of the truth of that statement, saying, God, we want your church to literally be a reflection of a kingdom environment. And that's really all you're going for when you're writing songs, is you're trying to say things that are true, and they're true about the condition of where you are in your life, but they also contain, I say capital T truths.
Yeah. Well, okay, so capital T truth. So this is kind of like even my experience with you, working with us on that Porter's Gate record that we did. the kingdom of Jesus, the songs
Yeah.
for the after party. It's very ecumenical, right? And so here, I joked and said, you kind of checked those 3 C boxes. But what do you think it is? I'm curious about kind of being raised in a Catholic church, and then you said you had a interesting salvation experience at that church in Arizona, about the Catholic faith that maybe informed your imagination, your sense of beauty, your musical instincts, even your theology that you kind of bring with you when you're working with other people that are, from other denominations, or no denomination at all. What did the Catholic faith bring to the table for you? And still bring to the table?
Still
right.
does.
Yeah,
still does. Well, I think what I would say is that I had a conversion in a very specific denomination of the church and had a very specific view of the church from an ecclesial level. And I was never raised around people, similarly, like some people would say to me when I started touring in non-Catholic churches, they would say, well, do people tell you you're not a Christian? And I'm like, well, no one's that bold. They might pray, they might think it from the back of the room, but they're not going to come up and say anything usually. But I said that hasn't been my experience. But I have the humility now to say, like, I didn't really think about Christians outside of my own faith, my own church.
Yeah.
And
I venture to say you're not alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's most people. Like, most people's experience
what you know is what you know
of the church is what they know.
Yeah.
In 2000, this was 30 or 21 years ago, last year, I went to the Passion Conference for the first time. I was invited to be a worship leader for a community group, which I look back on that now and go, that was very risky on the part of someone like Louis Giglio, who invited a Catholic to come lead a small group as a worship leader. But Chris Tomlin had recorded Your Grace Is Enough. And so I was there. I'm watching 11,000 Baptists sing this song in Bridgestone Arena, and I'm looking around and I'm just thinking to myself, who is God that he would do this? That, like, I would write this in an Arizona room, which is basically an un-air conditioned covered porch in Arizona. Yeah. And with a Bible and a lot of coffee, and now I'm at a conference with 11,000 Baptists and they're singing this. And I immediately, my view of the church, it wasn't so much that it started to expand, it was that there was this invisible membrane that I constructed and it burst. And over the next several months, I stumbled onto the 17th chapter of John's Gospel.
Okay.
And Jesus' prayer that we would be as close to each other as he is with his Father. And I just sort of realized I don't regularly pray this prayer. I don't really have a vision for it in my life. I'm not trying to agree with it on a regular basis. It's the longest prayer that Jesus prays in the Bible, and I'm just sidestepping it. And I'm not contending for it. And so I just started to ask the question, what does it look like for me with my gifts and talents in my life to start to agree with this prayer? And I realized that my songs were a way for me to agree with the prayer. Can we sit in the tension of going, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and in him we have the fullness of life, but something's broken here, God. And we can't fix it. We can't fix it on our own accord with our own strength. I mean, it's very, very similar to the sinner's prayer that we want people to pray, is the nature of the church to say, like, we're living in a world where it's so fragmented. And even now, because of social media, as if individual denominations weren't enough, now it's just individuals.
Right. Well, I would say you're speaking prophetically, and I'm glad, because there is a quote that I pulled from you, and I thought this is really kind of the heart of what I want to get into. And This is from, a few years back. You had joined Mac Powell and Ellie Holcomb to finish and release a long-lost Rich Mullins song called The Joy of Jesus.
Yeah.
Right. I'm a Rich Mullins guy, knew Rich a little bit. And when you were asked about that song at the time, this is what you said, and you probably know exactly where I'm going. You said, my hope in being a part of this song isn't that we just sort of have a nostalgic moment and remember a nice guy. You said, my hope is that people are inspired, particularly those of us who sing and write, to remember our prophetic calling, to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comforted, right? And I have to tell you, I love that. And so what I want to know, when you sing and write, right, how do you think about the receiver of your work, right? Both the all too comfortable congregation singing the Matt Maher song in church and the afflicted person listening on Apple Music or Spotify, right? They receive your songs in a different time and space than, you when you're writing them. Do you mentally, spiritually bring them into that writing process? Like, what does that look like in that prophetic calling?
Well, I think on my best days, it first just starts with honesty with myself. But the deeper regret is that you aren't willing to say the things that God puts on your heart to say. And some of it is, some of it's, there was an album that came out back in 2018 called Echoes.
Okay.
So that album was originally supposed to be a protest album.
Really?
Yeah, so I kind of was looking at the state of the world from 2012 up until 2016.
Okay.
I've been touring a lot, met a lot of people. I met a lot of people in and out of politics during that time.
Sure.
And I just thought to myself, this is not headed in a good direction. Like the lone Canadian in the crowd, but it's just sort of like, we're just caring about this too much. We're picking sides, and really we need to be on the side of the gospel.
Right.
Sort of like unflinchingly willing to cling to the gospel, even if it means irrelevance, or even if it means being sort of dismissed by culture.
Pushed out of whatever tribe may be.
Yeah, well, whatever tribe you are.
Yeah.
It's just sort of like Jesus was really misunderstood often. So that album was going to be, and it was also because it was around the 500-year anniversary of the Reformation. Mm-hmm. And so it was just sort of asked, I was praying and thinking about, how do we ask questions about what does it mean to stand up for what you believe in, and how do we model this well in church and in the world? Because it feels like it's coming a time, and I think the music has a burden to be true. Mm-hmm. And so what I would say is that as a songwriter, if I get burdened with something, I'm trying to listen and figure out how to follow through with it. I think we have to also kind of resist the temptation that every single artist has to be outspoken about every single issue, because some people just don't have the capacity. Like, that's literally not their gifting.
Right.
Like if you look at the 12 apostles, they're very different people.
Yeah.
A zealot and a tax collector are not going to be the same people with the same interests and the same passions for everything.
I mean, this is how we started the after party. I mean, the whole idea that Jesus would actually go grab those two, and put them together. I mean, the zealots burned down the tax collector's home. Yeah. I mean, it's not like there was even hey, sit by me by the fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to me, the bigger concern is that there are people who are prophetic. There are artists who are speaking truth, and we just push them out because we don't want to deal with the discomfort.
Well, but a lot of the Bible's prophets, right? It's kind of this, you talked about tension, more the tension in art and marketing. But there's a tension, for the prophet too, between tenderness and turbulence.
Yeah.
And maybe, and I mean, I don't know what you think about this, but to your point that not everybody's gifting is the same, I think maybe sometimes you could be prophetic in one way and you avoid the other. That's, you're not a turbulent guy, you're a tenderness guy. You're not a tenderness guy, you're a turbulent. You don't have to be both.
No, and I think you have to follow the prompting of the Spirit. So I look at, it's a couple of years ago, I've written a lot of songs over the years with Chris Tomlin.
Yeah.
He's become a dear friend. Chris and I, he'd be the first to say this, we don't really have a lot in common as people. Like I'm nerdy as all get out.
You just like the same chords? Is that the...
Yeah, and the same God. And, like when he wrote Holy Forever, I sort of looked at that of going like, man, that is a really important thing to remember. That we do need these songs that sort of continue to sort of echo this high view of God. I just happen to believe that we don't have to do that and silence this other voice. I think we have to try to find a way to hold space for both.
Do you think there is, that some of these songs is there a point at which they become so familiar? When we sing them so often on Sunday.
Too familiar?
Yeah, like that they're no longer prophetic, that they lose their prophetic voice.
Yeah. It's like God said, if I ever forget you, Jerusalem, let my right hand be forgotten too. Which if God is saying that, maybe we need to say, if I forget what this is about.
Right.
Which I do think is like why a book like Amos exists. Is because we run the risk of a guy showing up saying he doesn't want any more songs. He's sick of the festivals. He wants justice to roll like a river. And we do. We have to kind of contend with that. Yeah. We really do. And that the hardest thing, man. But it's just like every great social movement in the history of Western civilization, thus far, has been largely not precipitated, but accelerated by Christians who became convicted of the need to participate in it. So whether it's the rights of workers or whether it's women's suffrage, whether it's anti-slavery, whether it's the civil rights movement, whether it's voting rights, you name it, the rights of the poor, the rights of migrant workers. Like the church has always had people who are hearing the call of God because they're coming to a church that is teaching them how to listen to the call of God, and that God actually might be calling on you in this area of life. That it's not just a bunch of ideology, that you could actually be driven by the Spirit. And so I think what's hard is that we sort of live in a day and age where certain things are seen as like, oh, that's definitely God calling you. But other things, it's like, oh, you've drank the Kool-Aid on something. And once again, it's like, are we doing that because the idea that someone would be called to champion, the environment in the city like Memphis, where they're building a data center, right, and there's a whole group of people and they're saying they're polluting our water supply. And it's like, if a pastor stands up and says, this is wrong, who are we to say that that's not God putting it on his heart? Right. And how can we pray for him and how can we support him?
No, that's right. But the song that you wrote along with Doe and Dee Wilson for us at the After, I always think of like Amos 5 and 6 when I'm listening to it.
400 years of silent nights in anxious prayer, the world away
man, it's so funny. All I can think of is being in my studio with Do and Dee, who I just love them so much, just as people, as like friends, and just a great experience of making music with friends and sort of reveling in the gift of creativity, and those lyrics just sort of like spontaneously dropping from heaven. And because it's the thing about that is it's very intentionally constructed.
Clearly.
So there's all these little kind of repeatable phrases and constructs, and so like the word eternity keeps getting used, but it gets flipped in the context of it. And I mean, Pastor Mika had shared during that week.
Mika Edmonson.
Yeah. And he just said a couple of things that were just so like gospel oriented, just truly, it felt countercultural because it felt contrary to he said, when Jesus rose, the empire fell. He literally said that line, which is that's how the third verse of that song starts.
When Christ arose, the empire fell, the gates of hell were torn apart. The ark of all the universe is bending toward the Son of God.
And so I appreciated his leadership, which to me, like I would look at it and I would see like that's a great example of a pastor having a prophetic call, accepting it, and watching that call shape the language that he uses, and his willingness to be very specific and very intentful. And it's not just specific in terms, like it's easy to be specific right now about, I don't like this, I don't like that, I hate this, I hate that, these people are wrong, this is wrong, that is wrong. It's harder to say something that points people to Jesus and also confronts the powers of the world, and also reminds people of the truth of the gospel. So like when Jesus rose, the empire fell is just such an incredible hope-filled statement that is very countercultural, and it's very specific, but it's not specific, because it's like empire is a specific word. He's not trying to specify who's the empire, but he's saying the spirit of the world, that any spirit of the world that promotes the idea of hegemonic empire, that spirit fell when Jesus rose from the dead.
Amen.
And which I just think is really, really that it's like that is part of our calling as Christians. It has been, for 2,000 years. And so, yeah, I got all emotional just hearing those words, because it transported me back where we really felt like, yeah, we were just being given a moment.
There's something about music, just like prayer, the cadence of it, right? The lyrical repetition. It's such a good teacher, but it also locks things. There's been studies that have shown this. The neuroimaging laboratory at Harvard has shown the way, like when music is played with dementia patients, or folks who have suffered a stroke or some kind of traumatic brain injury, the different things that light up, the things that happen where all of a sudden the synapses are connected again, and they can sing a song when they can't even remember who they are, so to speak, right? Yeah. Like music has a very powerful, it's a very powerful thing. And like I said, even like prayer and cadence, music is probably a way people will better remember those ideas, those truths, engage with those concepts than a million sermons.
Yeah, for sure. And And the goal then of hopefully some of these songs being songs that people sing is that there's ample, also continuous scientific evidence of what happens when people sing together. And we don't think about the fact that church is probably one of the last places in the human experience where every 7 days people come together, and a big part of what they're supposed to do is sing. But they're supposed to sing together because in the singing together, it creates a memory, like you were saying.
Yeah.
It does all these crazy cool physiological things of boosts immunity and like but it actually will synchronize your heart. So in groups where people sing together, their hearts will actually synchronize.
Really? Oh, that's
It
interesting.
has this very, really sort of approximate effect where, during COVID, they were talking about this because it wasn't happening. And they were saying how, what that would do to people in terms of the sense of isolation. That we weren't able to sort of sing. And so then when you take the idea that like we're singing prayers,
Right.
that some of these are very, very old, or some of these are truths that are very, very old, and we're embodying them in the present moment, it has a very, very profound, lasting effect. And it, like you said, if it helps embed these truths on an even deeper level into people's lives.
I mean, music in some ways, right, it does heavy lifting, right? It carries grief, it carries truth, it can carry hope, like you said, and it makes a memory, especially when we do it together. Does that ever, as you're writing the songs, does that feel weighty? Like, does that ever cause paralysis? Like, you're saying, I think you said earlier, sometimes, right, you sit down and it's a little scary to sit there and look at the page or hold the guitar.
It is very much. And you do feel a big sense of responsibility if you stop too long and think about it, which is why I try not to stop too long and think about it. One of my first reactions, and it's sort of like I sort of use it now as an internal guide, is it moving me?
Right.
Because if it doesn't move me, it's not going to move anyone else. And usually the first response is this sense of we just don't realize how loved we are. And how imminently close God is to our lives. And so it's like when I write a song and I stumble on a great lyric or a great melody or a great chorus, like even that, and just the fact that I am participating in this, it feels like I'm going back and witnessing the birth of the universe.
There are things in each of our lives that I think bring weight, right? Lament, sin, brokenness. There's a weight that comes with redemption as much as it's freeing, okay? And so with what you're talking about, it makes me think of like, I have heard of authors of books who they know when they write, lines that make them cry, the reader will cry.
Yeah.
When I used to produce documentaries and I would sit in an edit room with an editor and look at something and it's like everything works just right, and then you go, all right, you got me. So I know it's going to get them too.
Yes.
And it's that kind of move. And one of your songs that actually does that for me, right, was the title track from the stories I tell myself.
Never faced a battle that he couldn't win. And all you ever wanted was to be like him. But he drank his way through your teenage years. Now you're stuck with the bill for your father's sins. These are the stories I tell myself. This town has a ceiling that you never break through. You'll always be alone in a crowded room. And no matter how hard you work, it's true. You'll never be enough just being you. These are the stories I tell myself. When I think of Abraham, counting the stars up in the sky. When I think of Jacob, fighting an angel for his life. When I think of Joshua, walking around the walls until they fell. These are the stories I tell myself. These are the stories I tell.
Those lyrics, no doubt they're personal. But you also temper them in that third move there, right, where you kind of flip it with that grounding of biblical stories of faithfulness. And I wonder, how do you take something, you're talking about, if it makes me cry, I know it'll make other people cry. If it moves me to repent, it'll probably move other people to repent. If it moves me to love my God more, I hope it will do the same, for the listener and the person who sings the song. But how do you take something so deeply personal and write it in a way that still becomes congregational, right? Something that other people can inhabit and sing truthfully, even though they didn't write it.
Yeah, I think there's a sliding scale, so I would humbly admit that those verses really aren't incredibly corporate. I think the chorus by nature of those stories, because we all approach those stories, it makes it a shared moment. Like, we all have a moment of hearing the story of Abraham and God saying, look up at the sky, and count as many stars there are in the sky, it will be his descendants. And we all have had a moment of hearing that. And I've wrestled with that song so much about the verses, because there was this huge, Luke and Joel Smallbone helped me write that song.
Right, King of Country.
Yeah, for King of Country. And they really, we got together. It's hard because they're super busy, and we finally got together one day, and we had all these conversations, because it was just like, as soon as he heard the line, "These are the stories I tell myself," he knew exactly what the song was about, because it's a deeply personal concept for artists, and in particular, I think but anyone who's a public figure, more than ever before, is probably struggling with some form of imposter syndrome, where you feel like who people think you are versus who you are when you look in the mirror there's this disparity between the two. And the more we tried to write verses that felt more relatable or more accessible or more corporate, the more it just felt like it was getting away from what it was doing to me. And that I just sort of ultimately resigned of like, I think I'm just going to let this be a deeply personal song. And in some ways, a guy like Rich Mullins is a great example, because that's what Rich would do. And there's something about the specificity of it that makes it relatable to people. And it's not going to be relatable to everyone. There's lots of people like, hopefully, yeah, God willing, I don't drink my way through my kids' teenage years.
Right.
And in that specific season of life, that was the sort of the last thing that, like, my dad had passed away in 2018. And in the height of the pandemic, I realized that there was still a little bit of resentment that he wasn't able to show up the way that I needed. And at the same time, there was a maximum amount of respect and forgiveness, and going, gosh, you're an incredible man, and I really love, and ultimately I just miss you. But I need to say this, because also my kids were struggling with their identity and struggling with confidence, and they were little kids at the time, and it's like, where does this come from? And it's like, all it takes is one bad negative comment or one criticism from someone, and that shapes the story that you tell inside your head. So we tried to make it more corporate, and it just didn't, I wasn't finding it believable. And so, so that chorus was literally like, it just came out. Sitting at the piano, and as soon as I sang, but when I think of Abraham, I just wept. And it was like, because I knew what the song was about. I knew the song was about me confronting all my own insecurities and pathology, and doing it to leave a legacy to my kids, to say, I think the best way for you to confront your own shortcomings and your weakness and your wounds is the scriptures. It's the story of God, because your story is part of that story. You know, like the Bible was finished being written, but the story of God is still continuing.
Yeah, man, you mentioned Rich again, and just even all this makes me think of that lyric he wrote, when I think of Abraham.
Yeah.
How one star he saw had been lit for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's,
Right.
Because for me, I got my job working at the church that I worked at because of Rich. I don't really talk about it a lot because but he'd written this musical about St. Francis.
Canticle of the Plains.
Canticle of the Plains.
Yeah.
Set in the Wild West after the,
Wrote it with Beaker and Mitch McVicker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
they did like a read through of it at the church that I worked at, and I got cast in it. So I spent a month hanging out with Rich Mullins. I had no idea who he was.
Yeah.
He was just some crazy guy, barefoot, chain smoking. I'd go outside and have a cigarette with him because I smoked at the time. And I just was so impressed by who he was as a person. And then I started listening to his music more. Right. And I listened to a Liturgy, Legacy, and a Ragamuffin Band, and it blew my mind.
Yeah.
And my heart wide open.
Yeah, he was an interesting dude.
Oh, he was so interesting.
I mean,
but that I would say that song, I sort of made a production decision of like, I want that song to sort of live in that space.
So that kind of brings me to my final question for you.
Okay.
What's the song, Matt? What is the song that we need to sing right now? I don't mean here in this room,
No.
but as the church. Some of us as wounded people, some of us as people who are so full of joy because we've been saved by grace. But as people trying to stay faithful in a noisy world, what is the song we need to be singing right now?
I think what we probably need to do is to remind people that Psalm 22 starts with, my God, why have you forsaken me? My God, why have you forsaken me? Far from my deliverance are the words of my groaning. Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I have no rest. Yet you are holy, O you who are enthroned upon the praises of Israel. So literally the two verses that are back to back next to each other, that Jesus, as a good rabbi, whenever in Jewish culture, whenever you would reference a psalm, you would say one part, everyone knows you're quoting the whole thing. So Jesus says, God, why have you abandoned me? Yet you are holy, O you who are enthroned upon the praises of Israel. I think the song that the church needs to sing right now is the song that identifies the abandonment that people feel, but also a song that helps people remember that God's enthroned on the praises of his people. We don't have to abandon one for the other. And it feels like right now, essentially, we find ourselves in a world where people, you know the story of the train car during the Second World War that got parked outside a church on a Sunday morning? There was this train car full of Jews. And it was taking Jews to the concentration camps. And it was on a Sunday. And the train car got stopped on the tracks right outside a church. So it's kind of like probably behind the sanctuary, you know? And people were singing hymns. And all of a sudden the people in the train cars could hear the people singing hymns, and so they started calling out for help. And all of a sudden the cry of the people in the train car was getting louder and louder, that it was getting louder than the sound of the hymns. And the pastor got up to the ambo the pulpit
Yeah.
and said, sing louder. And so I do think that no matter whether we are singing God, why have you forsaken me, and singing songs that help people in their suffering identify with a God who knows their anguish, and while we're singing songs that very much paint a picture that God's enthroned in the praises of his people so they can encounter him, we really need to make sure that in both we're not singing too loud to drown out the cries of the poor and the suffering as a way of ignoring the call that God's placed on our life to be salt and light. Because I don't want to be that church. I don't want to be the church that's just singing loud just to drown out the sound.
Well, Matt, may that be so.
Yeah.
May that be so for all of us.
For all.
May that be so for the church. Thank you so much for coming back to the Good Faith Podcast. And listeners, we hope you will join us once again next week as we gather around the campfire.